side inside. We're going to look at two cases today. These are cases that were done many years ago. This happens to be a dentist on the left. He wanted his smile to look better. And on the right is a lady who needed her smile to look better because she's getting ready for her daughter's wedding in less than a year. So we're going to look at 7 steps that might help us be more successful with treating these patients. When Tim came to us, he obviously had some issues. He had a lot of wear. He didn't like how his smile looked. I had concerns about the success in treating him just to make his smile look better. As we look at Helene, as I mentioned, she came in and she said, my daughter's going to be married in about a year. I need my smile to look better. So we're going to share at the end of the day some concepts that I think are truly the pearl for success in treating these cases. The first thing I look at when I talk about my global evaluation is vertical dimension. And I must tell you, I start with that from a very subjective point of view. I simply look at the face. And I say, would that person look better if we had the vertical slightly more open? It's a very subjective evaluation. There are other reasons, though, that we might open vertical. In addition to facial aesthetics, we might also open vertical because we need to increase incisal edge length. We simply don't have the space to do it. Another possibility is maybe we need to do it so we can decrease angle of disclusion. This gentleman presented it initially because he wanted this bridge replaced. I couldn't do it. His bite was so deep, the forces that he put on it were so great, it had +3 mobility. Not until I changed the forces that he put on that bridge could I be successful. And the last possible reason that I would open vertical is simply I need room. I've got to have it for ease of restorability. So those are the considerations I'm going to ask about when I look at this global change in terms of altering vertical dimension. So when I looked at Tim's case, I had some thoughts. One is that, well, maybe we could open vertical just a little bit if I wanted to give him a little bit longer incisal edge, but you'll notice in here, he's actually covering these incisal edges. But facially, he somewhat appeared overclosed to me. Additionally, I was very worried about his occlusion. He had heavy wear and breakdown, and I wanted to decrease his angle of disclusion. So my first thought for Tim was that indeed maybe we might open his vertical just a little bit. Now, as all of us know, there's a revolution going on in dentistry today, and it's called myocentric dentistry, right? And we know, we combat it, we talk about it, we deal with it with students that come in all the time. And here's some information that I think we have to be aware of. When we talk about opening vertical, when we're in myocentric and we bring a condyle down and forward, we know the vertical's open, right? Well, you know that in myocentric dentistry, one of their claims to fame is that it optimizes muscle activity and force. That's one of the great reasons that we're going to do that. But let's look at what the research says. If you look at resting muscle activity levels, when we open vertical, notice that the muscle activity level goes down. But here's the good news. 3 to 4 months later, it goes back to its original muscle activity level. Now compare that with functional muscle activity levels. When we open vertical in that scenario, muscle activity goes up. The good news, once again, 3 to 4 months later, we go back to pre-treatment muscle activity levels. So when we're seeing these young people out there and they're talking about myocentric because opening vertical optimizes muscle activity and force, it's bogus. The studies don't support that. You go back to your pre-treatment muscle activity level. I think there's a take-home message there also, though, and that is, if we're going to open vertical, how long should we test it? And the answer is at least 3 to 4 months, because the studies indicate that's the time frame it might take to return to those pre-treatment muscle activity levels. That's important to know because it might affect how I have a fee for my restorations. If I'm going to prep and provisionalize, if they're going to wear those for an extended period of time, you can bet I'm going to have a separate fee for that procedure. If we don't get paid for it, we typically won't do it. So let's ask the question then, what is VDO? And I like to think about it like this. Vertical dimension of occlusion is simply an equilibrium between tooth contact position and contracted muscle length. It's just an equilibrium between those two things. So given that, as we start to treat our patients, I started with his anterior segment, I slightly opened him vertical, we established what we thought was right, and then we go back to the back and we provisionalize. And I have for years segmentally provisionalized the posterior quadrants. And I bet most of us have done it that way, right? Let me tell you one of my failures. I had a physician that I treated a little over a year ago. Full mouth reconstruction, we opened vertical. I did his anterior provisionals. We then did his posterior and segments. He wore his provisionals. He had some crown lengthening done. He was in temporaries for over a year. We finally got him finished and we got him put into his final restorations. He came back in on recall about 3-4 months later. Guess what had happened to his upper second molars? They had distalized, and he had open proximal contacts. And I looked and I said, my goodness, I know the day I submitted those contacts were not open. What did I do? I exceeded the contracted length of his master muscle. The forces distalized the back teeth, and I opened proximal contacts. So I now have a new rule, and my rule is this. When I am opening vertical dimension, and I'm testing that in provisionals, I will no longer keep those posterior molars segmentally connected. I will now separate those back teeth because I want to test that for a long enough period of time to make sure I have not exceeded the contracted length of the master muscle. So that's been my take-home message with that error that I made. The second step that I look at is I simply want to do a risk assessment. And by that I mean I'm going to ask the question, do these patients have occlusal disease? And by that I mean, do they have wear, chips, cracks, broken teeth, joint issues, muscle problems? There's a study by Sakata that says bite force alone is dictated by the size of the master muscle. So you can look at me and you can look at this master muscle and you better beware, because I promise I can put a heavy force on whatever you put in my mouth. So I'm worried about treating this gentleman. And y'all have probably heard many times my concepts of occlusion, where we talk about cows and gators. Gators are the very vertical up and down chewers. How do our materials and teeth hold up under compressive loads? They do great, don't they? What about those of us that are cows and we're side to side, back and forth loading things? How do we do with that? It's not so good. Now, the reality is we're not a cow or gator. Most of us are somewhere in between, but I think it's important to understand the concepts, and we have to recognize the patterns that those patients are showing us to help us determine what level of success we might have. So let me share with you the third thing, and this was my epiphany. So at this point, we all need to hold hands and circle the wagon, because here it comes. This is what struck me. As I look at this, we look at the big picture. Vertically, do we want to change him? Maybe. Do I want to decrease angle of exclusion? Maybe. Does he have a high risk level? Yes. Let me ask this question. When do teeth wear, chip, and break? When do restorations wear, chip, and break? Wherever we go, and we've always talked about what? Envelope of function. And we talk about working within somebody's envelope of function. And my contention is we're looking at the wrong thing. When do teeth and restorations wear, chip, crack, and break? The envelope of parafunction. That's the key right there. So as we look at the wear patterns and all the things that are going on, is what we have to do instead is we have to make restorations so that they function within the envelope of parafunction. So look at the big picture, look at the wear patterns, look at the angles that they've generated from those patterns, and let's try to restore somebody within that envelope of parafunction. Then we increase our possibility of success. Now, can we always do that? And the answer is no. We know that. There are times we can't do it. And we just have to understand there's going to be a higher level of risk with those patients.